Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch, our show following all the news and goings-ons with the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. I'm Daemon Hatfield, and as always, I'm joined by Jonathon Dornbush, host of IGN's PlayStation Podcast, Podcast Beyond.
Beyond. Hey, Damon.
And Ryan McCaffrey, host of IGN's Xbox Podcast, Podcast Unlocked.
Howdy, Damon.
And we're here this week to discuss the news that Square Enix is selling off Eidos, Crystal Dynamics, and Square Enix Montreal to the Embracer Group for $300 million, a paltry sum. It would seem like a fire sale sum. That's a separate issue to be discussed another time. The real question is, who is this mysterious Embracer Group, new owner of Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, Thief, Legacy of Kain, other franchises, but also the owner of many other famous game franchises? Quietly over the past recent years, Embracer has been acquiring more and more studios, and now they own, over 850 gaming franchises and IP. They've really become a powerhouse in the gaming scene. Who was it? It was Phil Rogers, Square Enix America and Europe CEO, said Embracer is the best kept secret in gaming. Well, no longer. Not after this episode. We're about to expose this secret. Who is in the Embracer Group, based in Sweden, formerly Nordic Games Licensing and THQ Nordic? I think in 2019 they changed the name just to Embracer, and it's an umbrella corporation of many different game developers and studios. Once this deal with Square Enix goes through, Embracer will have more than 14,000 employees, 10,000 game developers, 124 internal studios. It also confirmed it has more than 230 games in development, and more than 30 of those are AAA titles. So let's try to break this down, because definitely, with this many game studios under your belt, Embracer Group is going to be delivering many next-gen games in the not too distant future, and even in the distant future. So Embracer's the new home of Tomb Raider. Jonathon, we know there's recently the new Tomb Raider was revealed to be in development currently for Unreal Engine 5. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, that was the latest announcement for them, definitely a few years off. But of these three studios, I think that's the most concrete plan we have of what's going forward.
They also now have, of course, Deus Ex, Legacy of Kain. Ryan, I believe those franchises are dormant as of right now. Legacy of Kain, I think, has been dormant for a couple of decades.
Fans have been hoping for a revival of that for some time, and Deus Ex, as ever, is great. The original was great. The sequel was pretty good back at Ion Storm or Inspector, and then when it was revived by Eidos Montreal years and years later, we got some good games out of that, but they still just never quite sold, and they moved on from Deus Ex and just, of course, shipped Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy from that studio last year. So Deus Ex seems to be lying dormantly now as well.
But should that franchise be revived, now it will come to us by way of Embracer Group. And it's sort of a crazy pyramid of everything this company owns. So Embracer owns Koch Media, which owns Deep Silver, which owns Volition, owners of the Saints Row games. So now Embracer has Saints Row. We have a new Saints Row coming in August this year, right? But it also owns the Dead Island series, which is another,
Red Faction too is under Volition
Red Faction
as well.
Yeah, Red Faction is under Volition. Dead Island, is Dead Island 2 actually still in development? What do you think?
Last we heard it was, but
yeah,
that was
I
a
feel
while
like
ago, right, Jonathan?
Every year or so, maybe every 6 months, occasional earnings calls, the company will definitely say Dead Island 2 is still in development. And I think that happened as recently as in the last year or two. So it is a property they are aware of. And I certainly think it would, whether or not it sells, it would make a splash when it does come back in some sort of form.
At the very least, it hasn't been officially canceled. By way of THQ, Embracer has Darksiders. I think the last one was the spin-off Darksiders Genesis in 2019, which is more of a top-down sort of Diablo-style game. It has Kingdoms of Amalur. Ryan, can you speak to this? How did Kingdoms of Amalur end up in this sort of conglomerate?
Yeah, more shopping at the estate sale from Embracer on this one. This was 38 studios, Kurt Schilling's famous, infamously failed gaming enterprise. But we did get an excellent video game out of it. Kingdoms of Amalur was a really good action RPG. I mean, more of an, I guess, RPG adventure than kind of Diablo style action RPG. But yeah, it was very good. It was very good. It got re-released just as sort of a port up not too long ago. And yeah, this franchise had a lot of potential. The 38 Studios was working on. They did this, and then they were doing an MMO version that never saw the light of day. But yeah, there's this was I believe, if I recall correctly, Todd McFarlane did the art for this. There were some really interesting names involved, and the one game they got out turned out very well. And we'll see if these new owners at Embracer decide to do anything with it.
Well, another long dormant franchise under the Embracer group now. So by the funnel goes by way of Embracer, Coach Media, Deep Silver to Free Radical, developers of Time Splitters. Free Radical, I think Ryan, do you know, it fell apart at some point and was reformed last year, announced to be working on a new Time Splitters. Is that right?
Yeah, they got a lot of the original crew back together and just made a super early announcement, said, hey, we've just started to rebuild the team. We're just starting to work on this. And it never really caught on the Xbox. This was back when I worked at Official Xbox Magazine, but PlayStation 2 gamers loved it. So we'll see if, this one's going to need like a serious modernization and reimagining. But I'm always curious to see these. So I hope it turns out well.
Yeah, I mean, I was a big fan of Time Splitters back in the day. The talent behind that game goes back to Perfect Dark and GoldenEye at Rare. They made 3 of them back in the days of the Xbox, PS2, and GameCube. And then a 4th Time Splitters has been rumored as long as I've been at IGN, going back to 2006. But yeah, as you say, very interested to see what a Time Splitters game would look like today. After having been dormant for so long, we see even something like Halo Infinite, fantastic game, but they still struggle to launch with like enough multiplayer content to sort of keep people satisfied and happy for a while. It's really, really tough to launch a multiplayer game with enough content these days. So I don't know. We'll see what Time Splitters can look like. The Free Radical website right now is just a black background with some white text on it saying that they're hiring. So I think it's still very early days.
That works. They're spending their energy on the game, which is probably for the best, rather than the website.
Sure. But what this is on my research, a very surprising studio that Embracer owns is Gearbox, home of Borderlands. And I know, Ryan, we were talking about whether there's some confusion as to whether or not Embracer would have like first rights to publishing future Borderlands games. However, Embracer's website does list Borderlands under the franchises that they either own or control.
Okay.
So I don't know.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I didn't know for sure, but 2K has always, Gearbox had been independent for a while, but 2K had always published the Borderlands games. So it made me wonder if there was some sort of contractual agreement there for like a first right of refusal, but it's possible that Borderlands 3 was the final game in that deal, or if there was a deal to begin with. So either way, they're going to make money off of it, even if 2K were to be involved. But and we know that Borderlands isn't going away. We have a new Tales from the Borderlands coming this year from Gearbox themselves, with Telltale being dead and revived, but in a different form. So. I'm looking forward to that, because that's my favorite Borderlands is Tales from the Borderlands.
And then, Jonathan, via THQ Nordic, Embracer has several legacy game franchises and licenses, including the SpongeBob license, right?
Yeah, the THQ side has a lot of classics, both licensed and then franchises like Destroy All Humans that have been revived and keep going either through remakes and remasters or new sequels like with SpongeBob. So yeah, there's a lot of love for their stuff as well.
And that they also have Aspyr, which has re-released a bunch of Star Wars games like the Jedi Knight collection, the Pod Racing collection, but also Aspyr is making the KOTOR remake. Yeah. So a major Star Wars game is coming out from underneath the Embracer umbrella.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say Aspyr with, that one being particularly, they've handled primarily ports and remasters in that Star Wars universe. So this is a really big bet for them to do something. Obviously, it is a remake, but they're sort of doing it from the ground up. It's going to be, at least at launch, a PlayStation 5 and PC exclusive. And so that'll be sort of a really big, I think, testing and proving ground for them. And hopefully within the structure of Embracer, they're getting all the support that they need.
And finally, another one that Embracer has is Saber Interactive, owner of several franchises, including World War Z. And I should say, all these games and franchises that we just mentioned are just the big ones. There are dozens of other studios and franchises and IP under the Embracer Group that are maybe a little bit lesser known, but maybe they're mobile games. They're probably pretty successful. They're just not really the sort of thing that we cover at IGN. So I don't know. Embracer has really stealthily built itself up to be a real powerhouse in the gaming industry without having. It doesn't have the same sort of like presence or gamer cachet as like an EA or an Activision or even Square Enix. So I don't know. Ryan, were you surprised to hear this news that Square Enix was selling off Crystal Dynamics Eidos and Square Enix Montreal to Embracer Group?
Well, I mean, the word on the street had been that Square had been looking to move those studios for a while. In a pre-production meeting, Jonathon you'd been talking about how you'd reminded us all that every time a new Tomb Raider game would ship, it would ship millions of copies and critically be well received. And yet in the financial earnings report, Square would be like, it was a disappointment. So it never seemed like Crystal Dynamics and Tomb Raider and some of these Western franchises could satisfy the overlords at Square Enix. So that they sold them doesn't surprise me. That they sold them to Embracer for that low of a price does surprise me. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to Embracer Group, but yes, I'm the Xbox guy. I host the Xbox podcast here at IGN, but I mean, there's a legitimate reason to have thought, well, I thought Microsoft, if somebody was going to buy specifically Crystal and Tomb Raider, and there'd be reason Microsoft might want these other ones too, but there's a relationship there because you go back, Rise of the Tomb Raider was a big timed exclusive for 1 year on the Xbox. And then currently they are in a Microsoft and Crystal Dynamics, which obviously Square had to be involved in at the time. They have an agreement. There is a co-development situation happening on Perfect Dark, which Damon, I know you're very much looking forward to. That is co-developed by the Initiative and as well as Crystal Dynamics. And we do have confirmation that agreement is continuing. That partnership will continue. So now Square has basically taken themselves out of that, and Microsoft is in business with the Embracer Group on Perfect Dark. So I just thought Microsoft might have wanted to swoop in and grab Tomb Raider and that studio, especially as the Initiative's founder or co-founder, their employee number one, Daryl Gallagher, had formerly been a higher up at Crystal Dynamics as well, which probably explains where the co-development partnership came from. So, I would have thought, given this would have been couch cushion money for Microsoft compared to the Activision Blizzard acquisition for $70 billion. Right. This is a rounding error on that $300 million. So, I am a little surprised that that really, not just Microsoft, that none of the other big industry players came in and made a higher bid than this.
Yeah, we have sales numbers for Tomb Raider that were released this week alongside this acquisition. I believe it's something like 88 million copies of the Tomb Raider games have been sold. So maybe the games in the Tomb Raider franchise haven't sold quite as well as maybe it's not like a Call of Duty, certainly not like a Minecraft or a GTA 5. But Lara Croft herself, as like a brand name, is a household name, definitely in like the top 10, top 5 most recognizable video game characters of all time. Yeah, so I agree. For me, 300 million seemed very, very low. Jonathon, you actually penned an op-ed for IGN this week where you, I think you're sort of hopeful that this acquisition could be good for the studios that are being sold off. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a shock to all of us, and I spoke to an analyst and pulled in some other analyst details kind of about both the shock and the realistic fallout of it. And I do think part of the sticker shock is because we've just become now so accustomed to billion-dollar deals in the industry. That's something of at only 300 million, as Ryan joked, is couch cushion money for these corporations at this point. It seems so low. But as Ryan was also pointing out, and that I put in my op-ed, if you go back at least until the 2013 Tomb Raider, and not just that, but Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers, and then obviously with stuff like, Deus Ex kind of disappearing as a whole, Square Enix has consistently labeled these games, many of which reviewed very well and are very beloved games, they just weren't making a profit for them. They underperformed. And whether or not those expectations were right or wrong, on the books, they were not performing up to what Square wanted. And so if these studios are able to make critically acclaimed games and find success at a more commercial level with maybe different expectations at Embracer, I think that could maybe only benefit them in the long run. It's just possible that these studios weren't the best fit for what Square wants to do, and that's okay. But, there's a lot of talent at all three teams. Square Enix Montreal, we haven't really talked about. They made the mobile Go games. Those games were phenomenal. They're so fun. And so to see all of that talent just kind of sitting there waiting, not living up to Square's expectations, I think for me, if Embracer kind of lets them do what they're able to do well and tries to maximize that, this could be a good opportunity for the three studios.
Well, I hope you're right. I'm a big fan of the modern Tomb Raider and Deus Ex games. I was a fan of Legacy of Kain games, even though it's been a while since we've gotten a new one. So I hope this means good things for the future of those games, those characters, franchises, and of course the studios. Now, last episode, we had a poll for you. We asked, what do you think will end up being the best-selling console of the year? Because we were talking about how so far this year, the Switch is the best-selling console in terms of units, but the Xbox Series is the best-selling in terms of money made, and by some measures, that's the most important measure. So what we asked, what do you think will be the best-selling console of the year? The winning result, perhaps unsurprisingly with the IGN audience, was PS5. 44% of you thought that would be the best-selling console of the year. But what is a little bit surprising to me is that Xbox Series was a second guess, and then the Nintendo Switch came in last place, even though it is actually the best-selling console of the year so far. So I don't know. I think there's maybe some ignoring, some selective ignorance of the facts on some people's part there. We'll see. Before we go, we have a poll for you to vote on for next week. We want to know what series that we've just discussed would you like to see return for a next-gen game? Deus Ex, Time Splitters, Legacy of Kain, Duke Nukem? That's on the table because that's, Ryan, that's a Gearbox series, right?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that right before we went off air because, I legit would want to see another Duke Nukem game. Cliff Bleszinski, the creator of Gears of War, he's tweeted about this in the past. He has a legit pitch for a Duke Nukem game where it's set in the modern era where Duke can't be politically incorrect anymore and he has to sort of adapt. And I think that could be hilarious. And you pair it. I mean, Gearbox themselves as a studio has plenty of experience making good first-person shooters like Borderlands. I would love to see a new Duke Nukem game get made.
That kind of sounds like a Cobra Kai scenario.
There you go, exactly.
I don't know if you watched that show, but it just kind of sounded like, someone with outdated opinions and ideas has to sort of adapt to a younger generation. I think you're right. That could be interesting to see with Duke himself. Anyway, make sure to vote at IGN.com. We'll share the results with you next episode, and that will do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch. Thank you to both Ryan and Jonathan. Thank you to Mariah working behind the scenes to make this episode possible. Stay tuned for, I think, big things in the very near future of this show. I think we've got some big plans in store for you. Please be excited for that. My name is Damon. We'll be back next week, 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern with more PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X news. We'll see you then.